If anyone is wondering if this is terrifying, it is. I co-wrote the script of Gears of War Judgment with Rob Oughton. For all my life as a writer, I've thought about the differences between works of the imagination and works of journalism. The books you're looking at here are the first three that I wrote. All of them try to find some middle ground between so-called fiction and my actual experiences. Imagine my surprise then when writing an action video game provided me with the most satisfyingly creative mashup of fiction and experience that I've had in my career, and I'm now convinced that the best way to get good work out of a writer on an action video game is to encourage an almost repertorial approach. Because here's the thing, big-budget action video games are not and never will be a writer's medium. The writer on an action video game is there to make the characters pop, the world feel inhabited, and for the gamer's actions to feel contextualized. Trust me, if you try to do this well, it's plenty. Before Judgment, I'd worked on a couple of other games, but never in a way that had me involved from conception to release. So I was excited to see what the complete process was like. Here's what I knew it wasn't like. Write your story, give it to the level and gameplay guys, watch your vision come to life. Because again, we are not talking about a writer's medium here. The writer doesn't steer the story. Gameplay determines the story. The player steers the story. The writer contextualizes gameplay and grounds the player's experience in story. Let's call this the Valve method. It's still the best method. One point in the process where the writer does steer is in the very beginning. In our case, we devised the characters and the basic situation, which was a military tribunal. Then we and our creative director hashed out what exactly our locales would be, and then what would happen on a beat-by-beat basis. Of course, we had very little influence over the actual in-game mission goals. Professional level and mission designers are going to be far more likely to come up with feasible gameplay scenarios than two writers who play a lot of games. You need to accept this as a game writer, the sooner the better. After that, we all went our separate ways. Rob and I were writing the cinematics as well as the conversations we knew we were going to need, but often we'd hear from the guys at People Can Fly in Poland about little in-game scenarios they'd concocted. And here's where things got really interesting. What did they need from us? Well, one day we got an email, just write an interesting exchange about Baird's Day. Another, just write something about what someone might be feeling, or give us some interesting thoughts on life and stuff. That's a quote. Eventually going on that way, we had a whole script written. The problem was, we were writing dialogue that took place in environments we hadn't seen, after gunfights we hadn't fought, and assigning them to take place during moments we didn't really understand. Playing our scripted, air quote, judgment through for the first time was really, really difficult. The reason for that was that nothing in our script felt grounded. Exchanges felt mistimed, disassociated from the action. Just as an experience, it felt false. There's no other word for it. And we realized the only way to make it work was to allow the player's experience to be our story, and that required a new approach. I won't soon forget playing the game through while Rod Ferguson, our producer, then at Epic, watched over our shoulders. Rob and I winced many, many times. We decided to admit to Rod outright, Rod, the script, I don't think it works. Surely, we were both about to be fired. Rod looked at us and said, of course it doesn't work. Why would it work? You didn't have any context, so let's start again. Soon we weren't writing scenes based on someone else's summary. Now we could actually go into the world ourselves and see everything our characters saw. What it felt like to me a little bit was I felt like I was a journalist reporting live from Gears of War. Whatever we imagined as our story previously, the player's experience we now knew had to be the real story. So everything we did on this second run was to embrace that, to embrace the player's experience as our story. One of the many reasons I think video game scripts often feel divorced from what's actually happening on screen is that people have this very ingrained belief that game and story are two different things. And in many cases, a developer will get a script from a writer, and then they'll just have to make it work. And the thing is, a lot of the time, they do make it work pretty well. But our experience on Gears taught me that story and game need to be the same thing. The story has to be what the player does. What the game writer thus needs to do is provide orientation and mood. A writer who's not having a constant conversation with the experience of the player has been put in an impossible situation. A writer being a writer is going to try to write a story rather than provide the opportunity for a story, if that makes sense. Because here's the thing, a game about shooting and chainsawing monsters is inherently ridiculous. Sci-fi shooters are inherently ridiculous. As 100% delivered stories from me to you, it's impossible to ground them in anything that feels real. So how do you solve that? You make the player's experience, which is real, the story. I guess you would call me a critic of video game narrative delivery, and Rob and I have taken a few lumps in reviews of Judgment for having written a boring story. Several critics who said this also described how much they liked the game part of the campaign. So, victory, also frustrating. Games are not a storytelling medium. They're an experiential medium that allows stories to occur. The player's experience in Judgment tries to be the game's story. And why is that? Because our story will never be more exciting than that, especially in a game about cutting things in half with chainsaws.